Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. And we're looking forward to today's webinar on managing early career talent. But before we get started, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up Wednesday, November 17th, and it's titled Building a Skilled Team, How Upskilling, Coaching, and Recognition Can Help. It's going to be particularly valuable for employees who are looking for creative ways to attract top talent and keep them engaged. Thanks to our partners, including today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who've joined today's webinar. That's you. I'm putting a link in the chat space right now. You'll want to check this one out. The regular price for our conference tickets is $149, and this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. Today, we'll be exploring the topic shining a light on the early career path in your company. Early career talent needs to see how they'll develop and thrive in an organization, which starts with early engagement. Employers can build a talent acquisition pathway that includes internships and partnerships with schools and continues with learning and development in the beginning stages of an employee's career. Here's why a culture of inclusion and belonging is so important to early career candidates and how employers can communicate these qualities. Our sponsor today is Draup. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Draup is an AI-driven reskilling and talent intelligence platform that provides in-depth insights on the talent ecosystem. As enterprises are transforming at a rapid pace, Draup is empowering HR teams with a comprehensive and integrated view of the global talent ecosystem, including evolving roles and skills to assist in their talent initiatives. A few quick logistical items before we get started. In about 24 hours, we'll send you an email with info on both how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management, as well as HR Certification Institute. And you can look out for a written account of our conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. About 45 minutes into the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Emily McCrary Ruiz Esparza, an independent writer and editor who writes about workplace culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and hiring. Her work has appeared in Fast Company and In Her Sight, among others, and has been syndicated by MSN and The Motley Fool. Okay, Emily, over to you to hear about our speakers.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for being here on our panel and all the attendees in our audience. I'm looking forward to today's conversation, which is incredibly relevant right now. Young professionals are entering the workforce. Those that are entering the workforce and in the coming years will step into a very challenging environment whose long-term equilibrium was upset and transformed by the pandemic, remote and hybrid work, and now the Great Resignation. Employers will always need young talent, and especially now, as rapid skill development and agility are non-negotiables for future-proofing an enterprise. There's a lot that we'll discuss today when considering early career workers, so we'll get started right away. I'd like for each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, their role in their organization. We'll start with Judith, who's the first on my screen.
Hi, Emily, and hi, everyone. My name is Judith Almendra. I'm the Vice President for Human Capital and Talent Acquisition for TTEC. We have a presence around the globe, about 40, well, not 40,000 anymore, about 60,000 employees. That's an old stat. And I have responsibility for everything that comes and touches employee life cycle, making sure that our employees have the best experience in the company and that they can be developed to their full potential. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Kevin.
Hi, Kevin Danaher. I'm the head of campus recruiting at Wayfair. My role also includes programmatic and inclusivity recruiting processes for our interns, full-time MBA and PhD candidates as well.
Crystal?
Hi, Crystal Lannaman. I'm with BASF. It's the world's largest chemical company, and I am head of talent acquisition there. And so that encompasses all the way from attraction, recruiting, executive recruiting, analytics, and also including the university recruitment program, which is a rotational program that we have for early graduates. So excited to be here.
Thanks, Crystal. Vijay.
Privileged to be here. Vijay Swaminathan, CEO of Draup. Draup is a global talent intelligence and reskilling platform. We work with customers through the lens of providing unique data sets and as well as deeper insights to influence the full life cycle talent strategy. So really honored to be here, and thank you for this opportunity.
And last but not least, Eric.
Hi, everyone. Eric Monte, Director of Talent Acquisition at Warner Music Group. I've been with the organization a little bit over 14 months now, and I manage basically a small team of very dedicated recruiters, handling anything from the corporate side to obviously artist aspects as well too. And also, in addition to that, student programs, which falls under my remit as well too. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll begin with the foundations. What considerations should go into developing an internship program? We'll begin specifically there. Who should sit at that decision table and whose interests need to be represented, whose interests within the organization need to be represented at that table? Crystal, we'll begin with you. How do you think about building that foundation of an internship program?
I get that it's an internship program, but ultimately everything that we do adds into the bigger picture. And so it's part of the funnel. So our internship program ultimately is impacting our senior leaders in the funnel, in the pipeline that we have for that. So the intentionality, even though it's an internship program, has to be holistic. So we have to think about the candidate, so the college student, the enterprise needs, short-term and long-term, but then also the business unit and what do they need on the day-to-day. So that summer, that time period. And so I think those are the main players, I would say, at the table. However, we also have to keep in mind the university too, and how do we partner with them? So I think those are the ones who interest should be provided. But I also think two things that we want to keep in mind too, which is conversion, which is huge, right? So going back to the why of the internship program leads to the long-term pipeline, but then also purpose. So purpose for the company, but also purpose for the intern or the college student, because purpose is really huge now for employees, let alone Gen Z employees coming into the workforce, and making sure that we're able to connect their purpose to either the company's why and what we're working on and the solutions, or the group or business unit that they're working in. So those are two things in addition that I would, keep in mind, especially since a lot of times development, I know, is huge for Gen Z, but also the purpose. So those two things would be key.
Crystal, who's representing the interests of the intern who's yet to be brought into the program? Who's that person at the table?
So that person for us is the program managers within our university recruitment team, because they are partnering with the university, the school teams, they're interviewing these candidates. So they have the close connection with them. They understand what's important to them, what's not, what are some of the concerns. So they represent that there.
Right.
They have a very interesting role because they have to wear both hats, right? So they're doing the enterprise, they're doing the candidates as well.
But because they're in close contact, regularly speaking with those interns and those candidates, that's who's doing it. Excellent. Eric, how do you think about building an internship program at Warner?
And following up with what Crystal was saying in regards to making sure that it's not only the program itself, but then what happens after that? Do we have a good ROI based on the needs of the business unit? So we do partner up with our different business units, our different labels under Warner Music Group. And we do definitely have conversations with them in terms of, okay, what are the expectations and what are we looking for? So ultimately, it's going to be a feeder program so that from an early career perspective, we are taking that into consideration.
So for many young candidates, either while they're developing their skills or right as they're entering the workforce, may have trouble envisioning themselves within certain organizations. So for example, we'll take Warner Music Group. Maybe you're coming out as an accountant. You're thinking, I don't work in media and entertainment. I don't know where I would see myself outside of maybe a firm or a consultancy. Judith, how do you help young candidates envision their first role in your company? And how do you talk to them about growing a career within your company?
Yes, I think that's an excellent point, because it's very hard sometimes for people to envision themselves. For us, it has always been a little bit of a struggle because we are a B2B. So as people are thinking about our organization, it's not necessarily a name that comes to mind. And so it was very important for us to educate and make sure that we're telling the stories, and that our previous interns are actually telling those stories about how they fit in our organization. I think that's where the internship program is, as Eric was saying, is a great opportunity to kind of like test the waters, right? And to really understand what is available, what's available out there. I have to tell you, we had some of our interns that traditionally would not necessarily be somebody that you would traditionally see a fit in an organization, people with biochemistry degrees, with political science degrees, but we were looking for people that was also a great cultural fit for us. And that was very important. And they actually had evolved into very different opportunities within the business side of our business. So, so I think it's allowing them to do that. Crystal touched on something that's very important, making sure that they understand there's a purpose and that they understand that the insights and the things that they are executing during that internship is relevant to the business. They are making an impact so they can see themselves long-term in the organization. So that has been very key for us. I think purpose is key. And I think just making sure that you are providing them with relevant projects, things that truly are meaningful to the organization.
Vijay, you and I had a conversation several weeks ago for From Day One. We had a webinar ourselves, and I know you know a lot about this. So how would you recommend employers think about representing themselves in a way that candidates can envision themselves within the company?
Absolutely. Thank you again. It's a privilege to interact with you in this format. I think there are three things that come to my mind as a result of your question. One is we employers have to understand that internship is a stepping stone for creating the relevant talent that they require in this digitally transforming ecosystem, because of various movements in the labor market, organizations will be increasingly depending on early career talent to take through their initiatives. And often what we see is actually companies need to have a very diverse view in terms of who would fit that internships. The definitions of that have to be revisited in a transforming, rapidly transforming cloud world, because today I can actually prove that the work that is done in, say, in computer vision by a university in New Mexico could be far better than what is done in MIT, right? Because cloud has kind of democratized how much infrastructure that universities can access. So we have to have a reimagination of the target universities that we are going after. And another big word about community colleges. About 8.2 million people just in the United States are in community colleges. Half of them would go into, or 1/3 of them may go into do undergraduate program, but the majority of them still have fantastic skill sets. Now the challenge is providing that vision, how this internship is going to actually take you to that entry level role, perhaps within the organization or within the industry. This is where a lot of enterprises have some work to do, because even an entry level role or a role that, say, for example, like a cloud support engineer or a cloud operations manager, all these are very simple roles by tasks and responsibilities, but they somehow enterprises imagine as these complex roles and say, like, we need 5 years experience, 6 years experience. We have put it outside the early career talent pool very easily, right? So if we can avoid these pitfalls and have an expansive strategy and also very clearly know the value the internship brings and articulate that. For example, a right internship offered to a graduate can increase the odds by 3 to 4 times in being successful in the first job, right? So that type of messaging, going back to Judith's excellent point that we have to look at the cultural fit. If we do that, it becomes a very productive experience for the candidate. So.
Great. Regarding first contact with very young professionals, even those still in school, Kevin, you have quite early contact with these folks. You mentioned even using programmatic as a way to reach out. Could you talk about how and when you initiate contact and how you start showing Wayfair to candidates who may not know about the company or may not have them on a radar in terms of being an employer?
Yep, sure. Great question. I think a lot of times our stakeholders think that it's just that junior, senior year from an internship and a full-time recruitment perspective. But we all know that it needs to start earlier than that. And it can be as early as freshman year. So we have a co-op program that's a part of that as well. But essentially what we do is we look at that from a spring programmatic standpoint. So whether that's resume review type opportunities, whether that's case preparation sessions, case competitions that we will actually sometimes put on and perform as well on campus. And then we participate in hackathons that are there. And essentially really it's just informational. It's relationship building at that point, and understanding the profile that you're looking for in the short term, and then also as you grow into the long term. Wayfair specifically, there's a business analyst, a business associate, and then we have software engineering. We have PhD econs that we work with and look for, and then also in the MBA space. So knowing all of those different profiles, you've got to understand the life cycle of the candidate coming through. So early on, it's really just kind of high level touch of information session, understanding who Wayfair is, what the career path looks like. Again, everybody probably thinks of Wayfair as e-commerce, but it is a tech company as well. So having those diverse profiles that we look for really gives us an opportunity to establish and grow relationships with multiple business schools, but then also schools within larger universities as well. So each of those processes and timeframes are going to look a little bit different. And I think most of our hackathons are probably in that freshman, sophomore year. And then as we start to get into the programmatic feel of whether it's information sessions and some of the case competitions that we sponsor and then also host as well, that could be across all of those years. And the idea here is we're targeting the right profile of students. The last thing we want to do is post and see who applies, right? We want to have these events as pre-identification processes. And then of course, we're spending the time with the right students that meet those profiles. And that's a big piece to that. Sometimes it's hard to get stakeholders to understand why we would invest time and dollars into that, but it's also, I think, when we get to the funnel piece and we look at quality of candidates and long-term engagement with interns and full-time employees, the ones you identify and grow organically typically stay longer because they understand what the culture and the environment and inclusivity looks like at the organization.
Anyone else on the panel looking outside of educational university settings for talent pools? I'm curious where else folks are finding them. Crystal?
Yeah, so we're a manufacturing company. And one of the things that we're starting to run into is the fact that people don't grow up and say, hey, I want to be an operator when I grow up. Even though you can make six figures, people don't understand the benefits, the value, the career trajectory that comes with that. So outside of community colleges, we also are working with high schools in a lot of local areas and also other community groups, whether it's mom groups, things of that nature, to tap into talent pools that traditionally wouldn't be talent pools to get them exposure to what could be in the future. And then obviously there may not be the one-on-one connection with the individual, but hopefully through whether it's school, community colleges, or other organizations, that STEM awareness is there. And then they're also aware of BASF as a company. And then ultimately the hope is that there's some return there. So for us, that's definitely huge on the manufacturing side.
Yes, I would just add, very similar to Crystal, right? A lot of organizations, a lot of people think about TTEC as a contact center organization, and we have evolved into much more of a technology and a digital solutions company, a customer experience company. So it is, for us, it's very important to make sure that we had the proper positioning, that we were caring for the things that are relevant to candidates. We talk about purpose, we talk about diversity, inclusivity, all of those components were important to us. us. So we had been working and making sure that we are where they are, right? So in the social channels, on the handshakes, and all of those different networks where this very digital driven generation is. So it was very important for us to make sure that we were repositioning ourselves, leveraging those that had experienced the company that to tell the story through testimonial. So it wasn't necessarily just a story coming from the company, but from our employees, because it makes it more real. So that has been very, very important to us. And over the last few years, we proudly had won multiple awards, with Forbes and Comparably and Glassdoor and a lot of different organizations about our presence with diversity, with women, with early career professionals. And I think that helps us with our messaging and the fact that we stand behind what we are communicating in the market.
Judith, I heard you mention social, being in different social channels, showing up where your potential candidates are. I'm curious if anyone on the panel is thinking about early career recruitment in tandem with employer branding. Maybe you have someone on employer. Crystal, would you jump in on this?
Yeah, so that's huge. Employer branding is on my team, attraction, and I would say the team is growing. I was actually on a conversation last week talking about the fact that really you have to have your own marketing within HR and not necessarily rely on the corporate concepts of it. So to Judith's point, using and leveraging those awards that companies get is huge, but also helping convert, I would say, the traditional communication message about the company and make it in more of a humanized way where the candidates can connect. One thing that's huge with Gen Z right now, to Judith's point, is they want to hear from employees more than they want to hear the company speak, right? So the video testimonials, comments, brand ambassadors within the companies, things like that are really huge for us. And things that we're working on. I think the other thing that we're realizing is that we check the box that we have social presence, but I don't think we're fully leveraging and understanding all of the KPIs behind some of them to make sure that we're actually utilizing them correctly. So if I think about LinkedIn, yeah, everyone has LinkedIn, great, check. But are we actually using it to post our jobs in the right way where we're getting the right visibility? And we're learning in certain cases the answer is no. And so we're working to enhance that as well.
Great. Vijay, I want to jump back to you. Earlier, I asked you about how to position or how to help an early career professional envision themselves within a company. If you could give 2 to 3 points that you think early career professionals are really looking for right now. I think this wraps in nicely to employer branding because you want to keep those top of mind as you're considering that strategy of how you put your company out in the world as an employer, not just as what you do on the business side. So what are maybe like the 2 or 3 things that you see as most important right now for young professionals?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to take a little bit from what Crystal said. If you look at, if we go around the commonality, BASF is a tech company, TTEC is a tech company, Wayfair is a tech company, and Steve Jobs already proved music is tech. So there is a digitally transforming job roles. Like today, actually, I'm super glad that Crystal mentioned this. A maintenance technician in a large manufacturing plant is actually a half technologist, because there's so many digital tools that have come their way, and the number of digital interfaces they handle with, and the data literacy that goes across all these roles. It doesn't matter whether you are a contact center agent or a cybersecurity specialist. The data literacy is required across all roles, right? So the first thing that we, an early career or an young professional would want to know is the newest version of the jobs and how it actually progresses. That vision needs to be communicated. You could start as a contact center agent, but guess what? We have automated most of the simpler calls. That means you're going to deal with some super complex calls. You may even become a psychological counselor at the end of it, because that's the kind of problem that is going to walk into it. And from there, you become an inside sales executive in 3 years. From there, you become an account manager. From there, you become a digital ambassador. And the options are limitless, right? So younger people, at least the Gen Z, wants to know the future is infinite and the future is full of possibilities. That's number one. So for that, we need to understand how our jobs are changing, and the practitioners have to take the lead their way, because many practitioners are not articulating that message clearly, number one. Number two, we are less concerned about making it very specific to the jobs. And I think we spoke a little bit about that. We may get a microbiologist doing some sort of an re-engineering work. And those experiences are very, very essential. So it's not just hard skills, it is the importance of the soft skills that the interns get. And that is not articulated well when we look at the big data, right? For example, skills like vertical thinking, sequential thinking, problem solving, collaboration, all these aspects that the interns get, that is really the true library. Because even if you teach them Python today, Python is introducing 100 libraries a week. Like, you will be outdated in 3 months, so you have to relearn that. So that learning agility aspect that that the job or the internship brings to that needs to be highlighted. Number two. Number three, there is a very important aspect that we would have to look at from a standpoint of for the same job, how do we articulate, when we put a team of internship, there will be diversity across disciplines, diversity across experience, diversity across what is called as the lived-in experience. How do we truly learn from each other and build that collaboration layer early on? And if we can create that, that can actually transport them into identifying some groundbreaking innovators early on and enable them in that path. I think that that is the most challenging thing enterprises find, because you have distributed teams. We spoke about that a little bit last time as well. You have teams sitting in Wyoming, teams sitting in Austin, Dallas, everywhere. But how do you bring them in the same agile cycle? This is the number one problem as a tech company or any company is facing, right? You can have people everywhere, but how do you bring them into an agile way of working on the same story, right? So for that, what are the tool sets and the processes required? It's not just having resources distributed, but they have to work in the same agile cycle. And that's a big skill of coordination, asynchronous communication, all these new age of working together. I think if that is another big area that interns will, if we can communicate that, we facilitate that, interns will value that, because I think this generation is probably going to continue to be distributed, continue to be working in an agile way for a very long time, for the foreseeable future. And they would value that skill in a big way based on our, at least some initial interviews that we have had. So I think these three components, if the offer stands out, I think the odds of enterprises thriving with internships is really high.
I want to, you mentioned diversity briefly there. I want to find out how panelists, specifically Eric, how you're aligning your early talent programs with your larger DEI strategy, and how maybe your DEI folks are working and involved with designing these programs and moving these folks through your organization.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. In terms of our DEI initiatives, they definitely have increased over the last year. And this was not necessarily just because of the BLM or anything of that nature. It was actually starting prior to that. So, so the team has been growing, and as talent acquisition professionals, we're also tied in with them in terms of aligning our initiatives. So, for example, we're looking at an HBCU program, which actually is going to tackle a number of this different type of internships and initiatives that we do have. But to your point, as far as DEI, it is top of mind. It is a conversation that we always are having with our leaders, even just as we're having those intake calls. And so this is not just from an internship perspective, but also from an early career or even experienced professionals as well too. As far as the organizations, it is quite varied as far as the ones that we do interact with. We could be looking at fairly well-known organizations such as T. Howard, Career Spring, Posey Foundation, certainly ones that are relevant to the music industry and entertainment as well. It could be Diversify the Stage. And so there's a number of organizations that we do interact with, and we continue to grow those partnerships as well too. So the more that we are there and looking at the diversity aspect of it, then we're actually in a better situation to expand our own funnel of students, potential employees, and this will allow them also to realize that there is a career path in Warner Music, and that we're not just talking about it from the music perspective per se, but that it is an actual company with all the other departments that you would see in any other organization, particularly on the corporate side. So you could definitely be someone in finance and still be in music. You could be in law, and there's opportunities. Technology, absolutely. You know, when we're talking about an uptick in number of data scientists that we have recruited for, and it just goes on in terms of how we see the growth in our organization from not only from the music perspective per se, but also from the technology standpoint and just the regular day-to-day operations of any large size company.
Crystal, when we spoke earlier, you told me about this great program that you have. I think definitely ties in with inclusion and increasing diversity across an organization. It's not just good for that. It's just good for skill development in general, but I'd like for you to talk about it in terms of maybe both. I would say it's a sort of a democratization of being able to access projects and skills. Could you talk about your talent marketplace?
Sure. So you actually had the perfect segue. So a while back, we did training, bias training or unconscious bias training with our managers. And one of the things that came out of that session was managers have a go-to person. Most times they know who it is. A lot of times they also didn't know that other people knew that they always went to the same person. And so one of the key things with this talent marketplace, it's an online tool where managers or employees can post projects, and employees across the region can pretty much vie for them or raise their hand to be considered. It's kind of like our version of the dating app where you can swipe left or swipe right to show that you're interested in something. And so the huge thing is so that ultimately the projects get exposure outside of your normal group of circle. So we're including or hopefully helping employees feel a little bit more included. This is something that's been in the works the last year. So it's there are obviously vendors out there that do this. Due to cost and other things, we decided to leverage a tool that was similar and reapply some of the technology in-house. And so we've created it ourselves. And so ultimately that's what it is. So we just deployed it Q3. Next month, we'll be getting some early data points in, but ultimately employees hear it and they have rave reviews, right? So the same way that consumerization is kind of the buzzword or has been the buzzword, employees are looking for the same benefits or ease of use to be able to be applied in the workplace. And so this is what we're doing in providing that developmental opportunity to come to them. The other benefit with this is that a lot of Gen Zs are looking for like leadership development programs when they come out of college, but also what we're finding is a lot of the millennials and Gen Ys also want that same opportunity because they feel like there's something that they're not getting by not being in this leadership development program. And so this in theory allows the employee to get different experiences along the way to prepare them to apply for other roles or promoted roles. One of the other things that we do is most of our roles are posted with something we call IBH or impact-based hiring. So we're not looking that you must have 5 years in this or 10 years in that. It's really more of the transferable skills. And so some of these projects will allow candidates or employees to showcase that transferable skill set in applying for future either elevated roles or roles outside of their current functional or wheelhouse.
That reminds me of the idea of a self-directed study of sort of building your own work experience, which I imagine would be really appealing to everyone, but especially someone who's new to the workforce for sure.
Yeah, to me, the new buzz is career lattice. So in trying to get employees to get away from the ladder of thinking that there only is one step up. And if you think of the ladder, to your point, then they're able to build it based off of what they're interested in and their skill sets and their passions. So that's something that we're trying to encourage, the broadening of awareness for folks too. So yeah, totally.
Yeah, Crystal, I think that point of making a move laterally instead of vertically isn't a bad thing, because it's skill identification and acquisition at that point. And that's a big piece for I think new hires to understand, that it doesn't always have to be a linear progression, right? There's a different path for everybody. And I think that that's always such a great piece to share with anybody starting. So
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit more about the idea of careers now being nonlinear, especially for a Gen Z younger workforce. How are you guys thinking about offering reskilling and upskilling programs to this demographic? Eric, do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure, I'll start. The topic was actually very, very timely. And the HBCU program that I was talking about was actually inviting some of our leaders to talk about their experiences and talk about the fact that it's not a straight line when you're talking about a career. And many folks who were in very different industries, myself as well too, coming into music and entertainment, and just having those conversations. And I think as someone who's starting out or who's not necessarily sure of where they're going to be in the next couple of years, to hear other folks who have already gone through many years perhaps, and they've not had that linear path to let's say music and entertainment, it is interesting for them to see that they can do it, and that you can go from one industry to the other and still come back to the one that you may eventually end up with. Until then, I don't know, for many people thinking of retirement right now, it's probably way too long, but it could be one of those sort of circumstances. So we're tackling more the aspects of doing webinars as well, so that we can let them know that there are those paths available for them. And I think that's a good way to start the conversation, and so that they can see and they can realize that they can actually be in a totally different industry or education path, and then end up in music and entertainment, for example.
Vijay, what's the best piece of advice you can provide to an employer who wants to, we'll say, reskill or upskill a young new hire? What's the single best way to go about doing that?
I don't know if I know the single best way, but I can share in terms of what people have attempted to. A certain section of the university, I think University of Toronto, I don't remember the exact university, they looked at what are the common traits of about 20,000 plus startups, between the year 2008 to 20. One interesting component that what led to really high accomplishing founders, builders of unicorns and companies like that, they've always focused on building something on their own, even as a small, whether it could be a small mobile app or a small website, and building something which caters to even to 50, 100 people within the community or within the ecosystem that they thrive on. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg has built number of apps before building the Facebook version of the app, even within the university. It could be just connecting dorm students, or it could be certain thing within that. So they treat the trait that is really that companies are that led to big discovery is building a simple digitally driven platform of sorts, right? So if we reverse engineer from that, I think if we can focus on enabling that in terms of looking, when you build something like that, you are learning multiple skills underneath that. What is the use case? And how many people it is going to cater, what are the infrastructure that it is going to require, how am I going to store, retrieve, and manage data. So there is an entire set of digital ecosystem components that goes with that. And all subsequently you are doing is basically validating, right? For example, the founders of Flat Iron Health, they actually found a company called Eat Now, which is from an app standpoint, everything was better or equivalent to DoorDash. But DoorDash took off because Eat Now collected money from restaurants. It didn't collect money from the people who order food on it, right? So that was the only experience gap, but the technology and the ability to build it, they had that even as at Eat Now, right? So how do we teach them to build something, even if it didn't have a sound business model, even if it can cater to, and with the advent of cloud, the great thing is you can just rent a cloud instance so cheap. And if that can be part of the internship curriculum, I think we are creating some unbelievable leaders from there on. I think that was what the researchers found, and that's what comes to my mind. So.
Emily, if I may just add, what I would say is also, in addition to that, for anyone that is looking to do something different, right? I think you gotta be an active owner of your career, and you need to make it approachable. So I think that's important that we continue to encourage people to do that, and that they feel comfortable in the organization. We put together a program and a platform that is called I Aspire. So the intention is for us to capture what are the aspirations of our employees, what are the things that they want to do. We have people that want to be musicians, right? That's a little bit more challenging in our organization. But it's like there are places in which we can help them take them. We work with Fortune 500 companies. They are our top clients. So we can help them, whether it's within the organization or outside of the organization, to help them reach those aspirations. So we show them kind of like what's the path, what are the things that they need to continue to develop, and what's the skill set. And I think we have great proven points across the business. My background is something completely different than human resources. And at some point is you have mentors along your career. And I think getting those early on in your career, it also helps you to learn from others' mistakes or others' learnings, right? So I just always advise my mentees and anyone that I work very early on their careers to make sure that they look for guidance, that they take advantage of the tools, resources, and opportunities that are available to them. You have to own your career in order to, take you where you need to be.
We're about to move on to Q&A here in a moment. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. Before we move on, one quick question I want to ask is, anyone who's managed a early career employee may be familiar with the fact that they often need a little bit more management and coaching than someone who's been in the workforce for 5 or more years. And I know a lot of managers who may be called upon to hire young employees, it might not be the favorite thing on their list. So how do you all think about getting hiring managers on board with bringing on young talent? And how do you help encourage good working relationships between those young new hires and veteran employees? Anybody who'd like to jump in on this, please do.
I would say that for us, that was probably one of the biggest challenges we had and it didn't come necessarily from the fact that it was an age or a generational gap necessarily, was just the fact that our hiring managers felt like, we just don't have the time to invest. And it was always, just bring me somebody. So when you're talking with a TA, with your talent acquisition person, it's like, bring me somebody that already knows, has done the job and all of that. And I think what 2 of our programs, the leadership development internships, as well as the talent accelerator program we have had allowed us to prove to them what's the value that an early career professional brings to their organization, and the fact that they've been able to make a very quick impact in their business. So just things that were completely outside of the box. Again, this generation grew in the digital world, right? So they are quick. They sometimes tend to look at things slightly different, think about automation a little bit more. So and push some things that, to be honest, they were a little bit outside of our comfort zone, but I think it's those proven examples, and that now it has created such a high demand for early career professional, which is not something that we experienced years back. So for us, that has been a good pivotal point, the fact that they were able to experience it, and we support them from the human capital perspective to make sure that we have a structured program, that we facilitated the onboarding process to make sure that they were successful, and that we could accelerate the learning curve of coming to corporate America.
So I would say the biggest thing for us is more feedback and kind of like recognition, and that the employees want more of that. And unfortunately, it's like a softer skill that is hard to teach for some people. So helping hiring managers understand that need for recognition and appreciation and the purpose right now is kind of the big thing of what we're reinforcing with our hiring managers for early in career talent that they have. But the bigger piece is inclusion. And so inclusion is a foundational enterprise-wide priority right now. And so inclusion, regardless of generation, is all things. So mindset, how do you approach the work? And so ultimately, it's really taking that situational stuff leadership approach, which is for every goal, task, or skill, each employee will handle it and approach it differently. And how, as a leader, you need to support them from a competence perspective or from a motivation perspective. And ultimately, there's something that the Gen Y or the Gen Z will be able to provide that your baby boomer will not. And how do you kind of pretty much pull their strengths out of each of them to get them to perform at their peak, which ultimately then means the entire team and the enterprise wins. So that's really what our focus is, versus trying to do kind of the stereotype with each generation, because I think you have one-offs where I should know technology, but I'm not really that good, where there's a vice versa of a baby boomer who's better than me, right? So you always have those one-off exceptions. So it's really getting the hiring managers to go intimately one-on-one with each person, finding their strengths, and how do you leverage that as a broader team and enterprise.
Judith, you hit on the investment piece already, which I think is a conversation that we all have around the internship programs and early career hiring. I think one of the benefits that we've seen with our stakeholders is as you grow, just-in-time hiring is so important, because the teams need the talent right away. And I think what suffers sometimes in that situation is a diverse candidate pool coming through. So when we start to look at diversity and inclusion as a part of our hiring focus, specific to grow that team, we then come back to the fact of we have a large, diverse candidate pool coming from schools across the country that we have the ability to be able to connect with and build relationships along the way. And that we talked about before, that organic growth is so important. Yes, it may take longer for those employees to come and join the firm, but we also have apprenticeship opportunities and co-ops as well. So I think it's being creative of how you're presenting the candidate base to stakeholders, but also understanding and showing data around the fact that, you know, former interns typically perform better and they stay longer because they've had the ability to ramp up earlier, and they've worked with managers before, and they've been able to understand what it's going to be like to be there. So that's a big piece to it. It's always hard for them to see the forest through the trees when you tell them that it's going to take a year to bring an intern on full time, but understanding how that's going to impact the pipeline positively is a big win that we've seen for sure. And that's been helpful as we've grown that, not only that internship, but that co-op program as well. So
we have so many goodies in the Q&A box that I want to start getting to those. These are really good questions. So I'll start with this one. An anonymous attendee asks, there's a trend story out today about how young people are scrubbing their social media accounts of their political activism to look less radical to employers. Do you pay much attention to their histories in that regard?
So I'll start. Currently, we are not. However, I know certain industries and line of businesses are. So like education, they are. However, once you are an employee there, especially last year with everything that was going on in the US, there was a lot of a creation of a new policy and also terminations, unfortunately, that arise out of that, just based off of the inclusive culture that we wanted to create. So for us, it's more of observing, and not really observing, it gets more shared with us, honestly, as the employee, and not so much right now as the candidate, but we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, I would agree on that. We're not actively looking. I think at the executive levels of companies, that's a part of a background that review that happens for partner level and senior vice president level opportunities, of course. But what I have seen is that anonymously somebody will share a post or something that somebody has put up to say, I know that they've recently received an offer, or they're an employer, an intern, right? And that's the information that typically comes. And of course, then that goes to security review and conversations. And I've seen some things that have been super minor, and then I've seen some things that have been pretty egregious. And I think that it's handled individually. But yeah, I think you always have to be mindful of the brand you're putting out there, whether you're representing your company at that moment or not. It's certainly something that can always be brought back up. And I think we see people that have posted things 8 years ago, professional athletes, executives at companies, all those things. And you know, what you put out there on social media can always come back and find you in a positive and, you know, and or negative way as well. So I think it's a great question, but I don't know how many employers are actively looking at a Facebook or a Instagram or a you know, other channel before they make an offer.
Our next question is regarding remote and hybrid workforces. Does anyone have any best practices for building connectivity, trust, and camaraderie for internship programs that are virtually or globally distributed? Since moving to virtual, it's more difficult to replicate an inclusive environment where they feel comfortable with each other and building bonding moments. Anybody have advice or strategies for facilitating this? Maybe between those established employees and or even in cohorts coming in. Judith?
Yes, we have. So for us, it was very important to make sure that we had activities where we were incorporating our existing employees, so to make sure that they feel as they feel and understand the organization. So we had virtual happy hours and those kind of things, and there wasn't always necessarily alcohol involved. It was just more like having fun activities and things. And we were celebrating some key milestones with our employees. So with our interns, whether it was, you know, birthdays or things that were going on in their special life, it was important for us to celebrate personal milestones as well, not only professional milestones. So we were doing that. And I have to say, you know, with our last interns this summer, we actually brought them all together at the end of the summer to Denver. So even though the entire internship was remote, we brought the teams following all the health and safety protocols. We have taken not only what the CDC guidelines are, but we are being very conservative in our approach when it comes to that. But we wanted them to visit our campus to kind of like know a little bit more about the organization. It's going to be a year before they come and joined us, right? So it was important for us to make sure that they became familiar with the city of Denver and those kind of things. So I think that was extremely successful. They also got to know each other in person, and I think that really paid off in terms of the number of acceptance we have, the excitement, and how much they publish in their social channels about their experience with the company this past summer.
The only thing I would add to that is we found success in small groups. So obviously the onboarding was with a large group, but having the small breakouts, whether with employees, to Judith's points, or amongst themselves in smaller cohorts, so they could open up. So we use popcorn, where it's kind of like you automatically group people together and then they have to have lunch, right? So there's different either man-made or, you know, platform or system-made, you know, solutions that can help with that. But that was one of the things that we learned. But I think honestly, we're all still trying to figure it out for the summer again.
Do you all have any formal programs in place that help employees in the transition from being an intern to becoming a full-time employee? This question asker says, we've noticed that many of these employees are experiencing the same difficulties in terms of work-life balance, receiving feedback, understanding financials, and having crucial conversations with their manager. So it sounds like they're looking for help on a smoother transition, between internship and full-time hire. Anybody have something in place for that or advice?
I mean, it's primarily built into our onboarding program. We also have, so for our associates that we hire as well, I think, Crystal, to the part that you mentioned before, we actually have what we'll call like a capstone project for them to be able to work on to really be able to focus on prioritization and deliverables and to work with stakeholders outside of their functional group as well. So that provides them the opportunity to have a mentor that may not be their coach or manager on a day-to-day basis, that they're getting some exposure to. And I think as you're seeing some of these issues pop up, and we've probably had a couple here in the last couple months with new employees as well, is communication is key, right? And letting the person know that if you're having an issue or you're struggling with something, communicating that to your manager or to a coach doesn't mean that that's a negative. Asking for help does not mean that you're not performing, right? It's when you get to the point where those things are falling through the cracks and it's being brought to your attention, that of course, when you get to that development piece. So I think it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to let somebody know that you're struggling and to be able to provide that. I think we as employers always say, oh, well, here's our slide on work-life balance. Go take a look at it. Here's some creative ways to be able to do that. I think that one-on-one conversation and the investment in people is important. Empathy, of course, is important, but also, it's got to be both ways, right? To understand, if you've stepped away from your desk for an hour in this virtual environment, just let somebody know that you've done it, right? So that you need a break, or you've got to take a walk because you've been 9 hours on a video. So communication in that point is key, but also understanding, I think, to the earlier conversation, is there a root cause to this? Do you need some accommodations? What can we do to help? So I think, Judith, you mentioned, taking control of your career. I think we have to let people know that they can take control of asking for help in that situation as well. It can't always just be a manager identifying that we're going to have feedback because there's a development issue. They have to recognize that there's some help that they need as well.
Just one point, if I can add to what Kevin brilliantly put. I think in the institutes or enterprises that have done it well, a huge amount of ownership is also taken by the interns in developing the appropriate relationships, networking, seeking the right leaders' advice as part of their journey. And it is the responsibility lies on both sides. And I think with an empowered mode, the newer generation is working on, I think it's a question of having the right level of mentorship. And that is a very, very important aspect that needs to be in place. That mentorship need not be even within the core responsibility, but a group of mentors really developing and facilitating that relationships for them can be extremely beneficial. We have a number of tech companies who have pioneered that, enterprises that have pioneered that and done really well in that fashion.
Thanks, Vijay. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. I'm very sorry we weren't able to get to all of our Q&A, but thank you to Eric, Kevin, Judith, Crystal, Vijay. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge. I'm going to kick it back to Steve at From Day One.
Thanks, Emily, and all of our panelists who, Emily, you've already named. Thank you. That was a nice touch. And it was a great conversation. Thanks again to Draup and to all of you for participating today. It's always fascinating to look at the workers of the future and what we can do to hasten them on their way. As far as From Day One, if you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll mention a few before signing off. Thursday, November 11th, we're talking about inclusion and intersectionality as CSR's biggest opportunity. On Tuesday, November 16th, we'll be talking about supporting employee financial wellness through all stages of life. And on Tuesday, November 30th, we're talking about getting real about social impact reporting and how to remove roadblocks to measuring your impact. So thanks, everyone. Stay well.
Thank you.